I'm Brother Dave Cruz from Desert Gateway Baptist Church, and I'd like to speak to you today about how to do a biographical Bible study. And this is a lot of fun. You'll really enjoy it. The Bible contains many stories of men and women and their relationships with God and with each other. To study the lives of these individuals is both meaningful and edifying. We can learn both what to do and what to be by studying the positive attributes, and what not to do and what not to be by studying the negative attributes of Bible characters. Using the biographical method of Bible study, you attempt to find out what made an individual's life a spiritual success or failure. You try to become thoroughly familiar with the inner life of the person you're studying, attempting to think and feel with him so that your study becomes a life-changing experience. In this method, you select a biblical person and research the scriptures about that individual in order to study his life and character. The application of this study comes when you examine your own life in light of the study and ask God to help you make positive character changes in your weak areas, thus resulting in Christian growth and maturity. Now, people are important to God. They were originally made in God's image and likeness, and the Bible is a record of God's dealings with them. By studying biographically, you get to know the prominent people of the Bible. Now, much of the Old Testament is in narrative form, describing the lives of men. Paul tells us that God gave us the stories of the Old Testament to be examples to us so we can learn valuable lessons for living for Him in this world. In Romans 15:4, he says, "For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope." In 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11, Paul says, "Now all these things happened unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come." Now, the New Testament is a book of instructions, whereas the Old Testament is a book of illustrations. The New Testament truths are really illustrated in the Old Testament. The Bible mentions over 3,000 people. Learning this method of Bible study will open up the door of lifetime of exciting and fulfilling Bible study. Biographical studies are fun to do and are also one of the easiest methods from which to find personal application. Now, what tools will you need for a biographical Bible study? First of all, you need a study Bible, a good study Bible. Make sure it's a King James, okay? But there's a lot of good study Bibles on the market right now. Get you a good King James study Bible. Secondly, get you an exhaustive concordance. I use Strong's exhaustive concordance. It's really good. Then get a topical Bible, and Nave has a topical Bible. It's called Nave's Topical Bible, obviously. And then you need a Bible dictionary or encyclopedia. And now the concordance and the topical Bible and the dictionary and the encyclopedia, you can get those things for yourself, but you can also get those things online as well, and they're free to use for your study. So those are the four things you really need to do a good biographical study. Now, how about some pointers for a good biographical study? First of all, start with a person on whom you can do a simple study. Begin with one about whom there are a small number of references. Some biblical people can be researched in a couple hours, others weeks to a lifetime. So don't start with people like Jesus or Moses or Abraham or Paul. Begin with some minor yet important people as Andrew, Barnabas, or even Mary of Bethany. Secondly, the secret of a good biographical study is to live with that person during the study. Walk in his sandals. Try to get inside his mind and see how he thinks and feels and responds to circumstances. Try to see his life from his point of view. Mingle with his friends and fight with his enemies. Become that person while you are studying him. This comes through repeatedly reading all the Bible references about him. So read those references over and over again. Number 3, be careful not to confuse different people who have the same name when you look up references about them. You'll have to be sure that the verse is speaking about the person you've chosen to study. For example, don't confuse John the Baptist with the Apostle John or with John Mark. The context will usually reveal which person it is. For example, the Bible shows us that there are several people with the same name. There are 30 different men in the Bible named Zechariah. There are 20 Nathans in the Bible, 15 Jonathans, 8 Judases, 9 Marys, 5 James, 5 Johns. So you have a lot of people with the same names, so be careful. Number 4, be careful to find the various names which may apply to the same individual. Since the Bible came out of a Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek context, some of the people's names changed in the different languages in both the Old and New Testaments. For example, even in the New Testament, Peter is also known as Simon, Simeon, and Cephas. You remember Daniel's three friends. We know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but their Jewish names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, there are a few occasions when the name change came because of a character change. For example, you have Jacob's name being changed to Israel. And when you read about that, it's very interesting. So be careful to find all the names used for the same person in your Bible study. Number 5, stay away from books written about biblical people until after you have exhausted every Bible reference about that person and have squeezed every possible insight out of those texts. Don't let a Bible commentator rob you of the joy of personal discovery or even prejudice your views on a particular individual. Do your own work first and then check other sources. Now, what are the simple steps on doing a biographical Bible study? Step number 1, select the person you want to study. You might start with someone who is either has a weakness that you have or a strength that you would like to develop. Choose a person whose life will give you some valuable insights into how you can conform more to God's standards for living and become more like Jesus Christ. Step 2, make a list of all the references about that person. Using your reference tools, find all the references you can about that person and things related to his life. This might include such things as his birth, major events of his life, his accomplishments, what others said about him, and even his death. Find out as much as you can. Look up any references that deal with the historical background of his life. If you were studying Daniel, you would need to study the background of his day, the Babylonian exile. If you were studying the Apostle Paul, you would also look at his missionary journeys. Step number 3, write down first impressions, and this will occur on your first reading. So write down first impressions. You read through the references you've listed and make some notes. Write down the first impression you have of this person, and then write down some basic observations and important information you discover about this person. Finally, list any problems or questions or difficulties you wonder about as you read these references. Step number 4, make a chronological outline, and this will happen on your second reading of these references. Make a chronological outline. For a major biblical person, read all the references again and make a chronological outline of his life. And this is going to help you gain a good perspective on his life, and you will see how different events will relate to one another. Later, when you study the events associated with his life, you will know in what part of his life they occurred. For the minor biblical people, or those for whom little is written, read the references and make an outline on the basis of the information you have. Try to read all the references in one sitting, which can help you feel the flow of the person's life. As you read, look for any natural major divisions in the person's life. Then look for and write down any progressions and changes of attitude in that person's life as time goes by. For an example, a well-known division of Moses' life would be 40 years in Pharaoh's court, in other words, learning how to be somebody, then 40 years in the Midian desert, learning then to be a nobody, and then 40 years in the wilderness, learning that God is somebody. This is a real key to studying the characters of the people involved. Watch how God slowly molds and changes the person, or even how Satan can bring him down. Step number 5, on your third reading, get some insights into the person. Go back over the references again and look for possible answers to the questions given in Part A of the attached notes. By answering some of these questions, you should get some helpful insights into studying the character of the person. Step number 6, on the fourth reading, identify some character qualities. As you review the references once again, use the suggested list of positive and negative characteristics in Part B of the attached notes as your checklist. List on your form or paper each quality, good and bad, that shows up in the person's life. Give a verse reference that shows each characteristic that you've observed. Step number 7, show how other Bible truths are illustrated in his life. Examine the person's life to see how it illustrates other truths taught in the Bible. For example, does his life show the principle of you reap what you sow. Look for illustrations of some of the proverbs in this person's life, and also principles that are taught in the Psalms. For example, you might ask, does this person's life illustrate the promise found in Psalm 37, verse 4, where it says, "Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart"? Find cross references that illustrate what the Bible says about some of the characteristics you found in this person's life. Then step number 8, summarize the main lesson or lessons. In a few sentences, write out what you think is the main lesson that is taught or is illustrated by this person's life. Is there one word that can describe this person's life? What was his outstanding characteristic? And then step 9, write out a personal application. Remember that it must be personal, practical, possible, and provable. In addition, you might ask yourself these additional questions. You might ask, did I see anything of myself in this person's life? Did he show me some of my weaknesses? Did he reveal to me some of my strengths? What impressed me most about this person's life? Where do I fall short in this area? And what do I intend to do about it? Then step number 10, make your study transferable. Condense what you have learned into a simple outline that will help you remember it and enable you to share your conclusions with other people. Divide the information into natural sequences of time and or events and lessons learned. Use the progressions that you have found and recorded. Then think of some easily remembered ways to title each section. Keep these titles true to the major content of each section, making use of rhymes, alliterations, and other memory devices. Use your imagination in this step. An illustration of a transferable outline in the life of Barnabas, for example, might look like this, and those are in your notes. That first of all, he was an investor of money in the lives of church members. That you find that in Acts chapter 4. In Acts chapter 9, he was the introducer of Saul, later Paul, to the apostles. In Acts chapter 11, thirdly, he was the inspector of the new church at Antioch. Also in chapter 11 and also in chapter 15, you find he was an instructor of new Christians, including Paul and John Mark. Then he was the initiator on the first missionary journey, which he began as the team leader, but ended as a team member in Acts 13 to 14. Also in those same chapters, he was an interpreter of the doctrine of salvation and God's plan for the Gentiles. And then finally, he was insistent in giving John Mark another opportunity to be trained in the gospel ministry. That's found in chapter 15. I also included in your notes Part C. And Part C provides a list of major and minor men and prominent women of the Bible. What you want to do is select any from this list that might be of particular interest to you. However, if you've never done this type of study, you might want to choose, again, one of the minor characters, like Mary of Bethany, Andrew, Caleb, Ruth, or Daniel. And so now we come to the homework section. I'm going to give you some homework to do, and I'd expect you to do it before the next lesson. The homework is to study the life of Stephen. Look up all the Bible references about Stephen and see if you can come up with an outline that you can share with us. What I'll do next week is I'll show you my outline. I'll show you my study notes for the life of Stephen. See if we can, if we come on the same frequency or whatever, about his life. Maybe you have something that you saw that I didn't see, and I'd like to hear about it. Okay, so that's going to be your homework for this next time. Well, God bless you. I trust that you're doing well, and pray for one another. And hopefully we'll be back in church together during Sunday school time once again. Okay, God bless you. Bye-bye.